Oh, what's going on, guys? It's Horse Beef here, and I'm bringing you another tier list video. What do you know? Didn't expect this one, did you? But today we're doing the overrated slash underrated tier list. So it's going to work like a bit of a spectrum. As you can see, fairly rated is that middle ground, and then we get slightly overrated, and then overrated, slightly underrated, and then underrated. So yes, this is going to be used like a spectrum, and we have a gigantic list here, so this will get quite extensive and quite long. So let's just jump into it here. Charles Oliveira, one of the fan favorites of the UFC in general. I'm gonna put him in slightly overrated though. His rap sheet is quite impressive, honestly, but nah. When I think about resume, to me resume is one of the more important aspects of determining whether somebody's overrated or not. And I actually think that Oliveira has one of the more impressive resumes within the UFC, especially at lightweight. You know, some of those guys he beat during his title run, not even someone like Khabib put together a resume like that, the way I see it. So I'm going to say Charles Oliveira is fairly rated, even though his fan base are a bit... they definitely do overrate him, his fan base, but in my opinion, he's fairly rated as far as like the grand scheme goes. Porier, I'm also going to put him in fairly rated. I don't think he's overrated one bit. What he's done in the UFC in short time speaks for itself. Not overrated at all. Bo Nickel, I'm going to put him in overrated, just flat out. I think he displayed against Brundage. Is he good? Is his grappling good? Yes. But on the feet, I mean, he knocked out that Val Woodburn dude, and people had this expectation that he had good stand-up, but he showed that he has very, very basic and below average, in my opinion, stand-up. And if he can't even ragdoll and dominate a guy like Cody Brundage in the first round, then I'm not too sure how he does against the top guys, because someone like Khamzat Chimaev would have steamrolled him that early on in the fight. But Bo Nickel, he just doesn't appear to be as good or nearly as good as someone like Dana White wants to think he is. So I'm putting him in overrated. Brandon Moreno, maybe slightly underrated. I feel like he doesn't really get the recognition he deserves. Watch some of his performances. Look at his resume. He has fought pretty much the who's who of this modern flyweight era. Did get the best of that quadrilogy against Divison Figueiredo as well, and I feel like he doesn't get his flowers really. I know he did get pieced up by Royval. As far as his whole career goes, I would say Moreno is a bit underrated. Yair Rodriguez, another Mexican fellow here. I'm going to say he's slightly overrated. I just don't really rate him that much. He's too wild on the feet. I love his kicking game, right? He is very active off his back, and he is a good fighter. I just don't really think that his rap sheet is that impressive. I don't think his resume is that impressive. His catalog of wins isn't that impressive. So to me, he's slightly overrated. Alexander Volkanovski, I'm going to say he's fairly rated. I can't say over or underrated at all for him, just because he's been knocked out twice in a row. Doesn't really take away from anything. If anything, the last couple of fights have put him in the slightly underrated category. You know what? I'm going to put him there. I'm going to put Volkanovski in slightly underrated, because now everybody is picking Porier to just steamroll him in the next fight. And it seems like the general consensus around the community is that he's washed now because of this. So I'm going to put him in slightly underrated, because I think Volkanovski can make a comeback despite his age. Corey Sandhagen, I'm going to put him in underrated, just flat out. I think his skill set is one of the most elite, especially at bantamweight. And if you're one of the most elite at bantamweight, then you have to be one of the most elite in the UFC, because bantamweight is so skilled, right? Top to bottom, just completely stacked. I think Corey Sandhagen has only improved recently, and added to that argument that he is one of the most underrated fighters that the UFC has to offer. He's added wrestling to his game and already has one of the cleanest striking skill sets in the UFC, in my opinion. There's no reason why he shouldn't be booked for a title shot, but now he's fighting Umar, so we'll see how that one goes. But I think he's underrated. This could definitely turn around and maybe move him a little bit higher up the list, more towards fairly rated if he ends up getting beaten by Umar Nurmagomedov. Dricus du Plessis, I'm going to put him in slightly underrated. I feel like the general fan base is starting to come around on him, but everyone seems to take away from his win against Sean Strickland. I don't think Sean was robbed in that fight. I really don't. And when somebody benefits off of a quote-unquote robbery decision. The community collectively likes to turn on that fighter and no longer rate that fighter. I think that's unfair because Dricus did very well in that fight, and I think won it. When I was watching it live, I actually was scoring it for Dricus 3-2, potentially 4-1. And I think there's a good chance that he also beats Israel Adesanya. So I'm going to put him in slightly underrated. I do think he is at that point. Chito Vera is overrated. I don't care if no one even rates him anymore after that O'Malley fight. He is overrated. The wins that he has, like against old dudes or chinny fighters, really, I mean, when it comes to the elite of the elite, he always fails. Completely dominated by Sandhagen, completely dominated and shut down and beat to a pulp by Sean O'Malley. The only thing about Chito Vera that is elite is his toughness and his chin. Pretty much his durability. That is the only elite aspect of Chito Vera. Michael Chandler, I'm going to put him in fairly rated because I feel like nobody considers him a title contender at all. Everyone just looks at him as that guy who will put on entertaining fights and throw down in the middle of the octagon, and he does that. The general consensus is pretty much that he's a stupid Homer Simpson type fighter, and he is that, right? He is exactly what everyone describes him as. So I would say he's fairly rated. Shavkat Rakhmonov, everyone knows that he's next up, really, to be champ. So I'll put him in fairly rated. I think at this point, if I made this video like a year or two ago, then for sure he would have been underrated. But at this point, Shavkat, I think, is fairly rated. Everyone knows he's a killer. Paulo Costa, I'm actually going to put him in slightly underrated. After his performance against Robert Whitaker, right, to have a competitive fight like that, when everyone really thought he was washed for so long, is impressive to me. He did better against Whitaker than a lot of guys in that division would. I know he didn't win the fight, but I still think that he displayed some high-level skill set in that fight, and he has a lot more to give the way I see it. I think he's a little bit underrated, man. His potential to get into that title picture again, I think, is there. If he beats Strickland, he's fighting Strickland, right? Yeah, if he beats Strickland, which I think there's a good chance he does. Dude, Paulo Costa could be in the title picture pretty soon. And would you put it past him to beat a guy like Dricus? I think stylistically, looks pretty good for Paulo in that fight. So I think he's underrated, dude. I really do. John Jones, as things currently stand, he's slightly overrated because everyone always calls him the GOAT, despite the fact that he's running away from Tom Aspinall. And I feel like it's taking away from his legacy a little bit, right? If he's constantly just trying to get that Stipe fight booked, which I assume it's booked at this point. John Jones did kind of allude to that. But when you look at his career in the grand scheme, yeah, there were a couple of robberies on there, but for the most part, he just ran through everybody that he fought. So John Jones, I would say, is in the fairly rated category. Now, for Max Holloway, I almost feel like he's underappreciated. I know that knockout of Justin Gaethje at UFC 300 did shock the world. It made headlines everywhere. Everyone was talking about it. Everyone was juiced up after that knockout. But maybe before that knockout, I would have put him here. But because of that knockout, everyone seems to be on Max Holloway's nuts now and saying he's him and all that. So I'd say he's fairly rated because he is him. He really is him. And then we get into Khamzat Chimaev. I'm going to stick him right in overrated. I don't see anything special in him. The fact that he has one round in him every single fight, he always slows down and gasses out after the first round if his opponents are able to survive that opening little bit, or that opening barrage, right? That opening pressure where he just bum rushes you, takes you down, drags you around the octagon. If you're able to survive that, because I don't think anyone is really able to stop him from getting you down in the first round. Or from getting, like no one's able to stop him, right? But if you can survive, then there is a very easy path to victory against Khamzat Chimaev. Once again, I've said it in my future champion tier list. I don't think he will be champ. He's just not active, and like he's also just not active at all. He really isn't. And I thought Gilbert Burns beat him personally. I don't know. I don't see it in Khamzat Chimaev. I don't see the hype, so I'm putting him there. Peter Yan, underrated, future champ, of course. He will beat the title defense streak. I've said it all before. You guys understand, and I'm sure you guys all agree with me that Peter Yan is the most underrated fighter in the UFC because he is the best fighter in the UFC, and people just don't seem to understand that. Peter Yan, underrated. Fight me on that, motherfuckers. Fight me on that. Pantoja, underrated as well. Despite the fact that he just beat Steve Erceg, do I agree with the decision? Not necessarily. But the community seems to just collectively be attacking this man, saying that he's boring, he's a lay and pray fighter. He is not in a boring fight. Like, yeah, sure. Are there prolonged periods of time where he has top control and not a whole lot is happening? Sure. But this man walks forward with reckless abandon, eats shots, and never stops marauding forward. He rarely does. And he looks gassed out in every single round because of his pace. Yet he just finds ways to use the energy that he has to pick up victories. And I find him to be very entertaining. And his grappling is elite. It really is. It's some of the best in the UFC. His striking, it's sloppy, but it's very effective. I don't know. I like Pantoja. I think he's a good champion. He's a pretty humble dude. Did I feel like he deserved to beat Erceg? Not necessarily, but still, as a fighter, the man is extremely underrated. And as a champion goes, he should get a lot more respect than he gets. Seriously, like everyone always talks about DJ. Oh, if DJ was in the UFC, he'd kill Pantoja. But who's to say that, man? Pantoja is the kind of fighter that can beat anybody. Because if you can't hurt him, if you can't hurt this guy, you can't stop him from coming forward. What can you really do against him? You have to be perfect, and you have to not allow him to get you in vulnerable positions because he's so elite on the ground. And he possesses power in his hands. I don't know. I like Pantoja. I think he's criminally underrated. Nate Diaz. As much as I love Nate Diaz, I'm actually going to put him in slightly overrated because I feel like Nate Diaz fans also know that he's not that great. You know what I mean? He never got by on his elite skill set. It was just his toughness and his general grit and attitude in the fights. Good boxing, right? Long combinations. Throws a nice 1-2. Good jiu-jitsu. But his record speaks for itself, really. Like he's never been an elite fighter, and he has a win over Conor McGregor, so that helps his case too, right? And he rocked Leon Edwards in the 5th round and pretty much beat him, right? 10 more seconds, 20 more seconds on that round. Nate Diaz is fighting for the title in his next fight and shit like that. But I still do think that Nate Diaz, as awesome as he is and as much as I do love him, I love Nate Diaz. Whenever a Nate Diaz fight comes around, I'm tuning in, popcorn in hand, locked in, okay? But I still do think he's overrated. I don't think there's a lot of argument really against that. Dustin Poirier, I'm going to say he's slightly underrated. He has such a crazy resume. I think he's up there in top 3, potentially top 4 greatest lightweights of all time. After his knockout loss against Gaethje, people are acting like he's washed, right? Just like everybody. Once you hit 35, and you get finished, you're apparently washed. But Dustin Poirier proved against BSD that he is not washed, and he has exactly what it takes to be champion. I think he won't beat Islam, but it wouldn't surprise me if he did. There's just something about Dustin Poirier. When people write him off, or they hate him because he beat Conor McGregor, or they think that he's a piece of shit for whatever reason, I don't know. There's just something going around where people just always seem to underrate Dustin Poirier, and I don't understand why. And you might disagree with this, but I do think he's slightly underrated. I don't think he deserves some of the detractors that he has. I really don't think so. Rafael Fiziev, I'm putting him in slightly overrated. I can't put him all the way at the top because I do think he has potential once he comes back from injury. He is one of the better strikers, especially at 155. And think about the elite strikers that are in that weight class. And Fiziev is among the best of them, potentially the best of them, right? Technique-wise, a lot of people would say that he is the best. But I think he's a bit overrated. I really do. I'm going to get into Israel Adesanya now. This one might piss people off. I kind of want to put him in slightly overrated. And it's based off of this, right? You look at his recent performances. What is he, like 1-3 in his last few fights, right? Finished by Alex Pereira, dominated by Sean Strickland, relatively dominated by Jan Blachowicz before that as well. And you just think about even the title defenses, the more recent title defenses that he had before losing his belt, those 2 times. A few robberies in there, right? Did he deserve to beat Yoel Romero by backpedaling and throwing leg kicks? I don't think so. Did he deserve to beat Whitaker the second time around? I don't think so. Did he look impressive against Cannonier? I didn't think so. Even though he beat Cannonier clearly, I didn't think he really looked that impressive against him. Did he look impressive against Vettori second time around? No, I thought he put on a better performance against Vettori the first time because at least he took risks. Yeah, I don't actually rate Izzy that much. I think he's slightly overrated. I can't put him at the very top though because Izzy, of course, right? He has set a legacy for himself. He is one of the best middleweights of all time when you really think about it. But I do think he's slightly overrated. JDM, I think he's slightly underrated. People are picking him against, picking Shavkat against him, I'd say pretty unanimously. But I think there's a good chance that JDM can get it done against Shavkat. He's shown that he can scramble at a high level. He showed that improvement against Gilbert Burns. And he has some of the best boxing in the UFC, man. He's tough as nails, crazy chin. We've seen him eat some bombs and just walk through it and look unfazed. I guess that Hafez fight did kind of, I don't know, it kind of put like a speed bump in his road, it kind of took away from his hype a little bit, but I think he gained all that back by finishing Gilbert Burns at UFC 300. So I'm going to say he's underrated just because of how people are picking Shavkat against him so surely, right? With so much assurity. But JDM can absolutely beat Shavkat, potentially finish him, man. That's going to be such a good fight. Yuri Prochazka, I'm going to say he's fairly rated. I don't think he's overrated. I don't think he's underrated. I think he's fairly rated. No matter what fights he loses, everybody always expects Yuri Prochazka to come back stronger, I feel. It's just the way that he carries himself. It's the way that he portrays himself. So I think everyone knows that Yuri Prochazka is elite, and everyone knows that Prochazka can beat anyone put in front of him. I think Yuri Prochazka beats Alex Pereira 5 times out of 10. I honestly do think so. I think Prochazka's underrated. Sean O'Malley, everyone knows now. I would have actually called him overrated until his last couple of performances. But at the same time, who has he beaten? He styled on Chito Vera. Chito Vera shouldn't have had that shot in the first place. Right, he should not have had that shot in the first place. Aljamain Sterling, he's going to be on this list too, and you'll see where I rank him. I don't honestly rate Sterling that much. I really don't. I don't rate Sterling. He lost to Peter Yan 100%. He did not win that fight. There's no argument to say that he won that fight. He did not win that fight. Before that, what was it? It wasn't a DQ. It was a no contest against Pedro Munoz in a fight that he wasn't even dominating in the first. I don't know. I just feel like we haven't seen enough of Sean O'Malley against the very, very top of the division to say that he's as good as people are saying he is now after that Cheeto fight, because I just don't think that the Cheeto performance is indicative of a legendary fighter or someone who could be in this category or this category or even this category, because now he's being called one of the best in the UFC. He's on the pound for pound list. Of course he would be, right? As a champion, you're usually going to be put on the pound for pound list. People calling him the best striker in the UFC, one of the best strikers in UFC history and all that. For that reason, I got to put him up here. Sorry. Robert Whitaker. Ooh, that's a tough one, man. Robert Whitaker is one of the best middleweights in UFC history. I think he has a stronger legacy than a lot of guys who have held the belt even longer than him, I think. Robert Whitaker, his legacy is set. A couple wins over Yoel Romero. Should have had a win against Israel Adesanya. Win against Paulo Costa now. Like, think about this. Robert Whitaker, he was champ for quite some time. Izzy takes the belt off him. Rather than getting an immediate rematch, Whitaker beats, I believe it was 3 contenders back to back to get that rematch against Izzy. And then, in my opinion, beat him and was robbed slightly. But still, his rap sheet, his resume is crazy. He has one of the best resumes of all time. If you actually look at the guys that he's beaten, if that Izzy win was flipped to, or that Izzy loss was flipped to a win, maybe we'd be speaking about criminally underrated, right? All the way down here. But I do think that Whitaker is an underrated fighter as things go. Justin Gaethje, damn. I actually think that Justin Gaethje is slightly overrated, and I would have still had this opinion even before the Max Holloway knockout and domination, right? I would have still said this because everybody was picking Justin Gaethje unanimously to just destroy Max Holloway, end his career, crack his chin, be the first man to crack it, right? Knock Max Holloway out. Everyone was saying it. It made no sense to me. So I would have put him here anyway. And maybe after that loss, people have came down on Justin Gaethje a little bit, but I still do think that he's overrated. He doesn't use wrestling. He's really just leg kicks and hooks, and beautiful uppercuts. Right? He throws a great uppercut. Great dirty boxing. It's one of he's one of the best dirty boxers in UFC history, 100%. But when it comes to his skill set, like who has he beaten? I guess he beat Fiziev. Yeah, that fight was really close though. I feel like a lot of people act like Justin Gaethje clearly won 2 and 3, but honestly, there's an argument that Fiziev won round 2 and could have honestly won that fight, but he ended the fight worse off, looking like he got hit by a truck. So that usually sways people into thinking that they were dominated. But realistically, man, Fiziev was very competitive in that fight and could have won it. I don't know. I just think that Gaethje's career turnaround, was it impressive? Absolutely. But was it as impressive as some people made it out to be? In my opinion, no. Every time he got to that tippy top and got the title shots, he failed every time. I love Gaethje. I love a Gaethje fight. I tune in every time he fights and I'm excited. But I just think he's a bit overrated. Steve Erceg, I'm going to say is slightly underrated. His skill set that he showed against Pantoja, right? He, after 4 fights in the UFC, maybe even 3, was it his 3rd fight or his 4th fight? I don't know. Either way, it doesn't matter to me. 3 or 4, title shot against someone as elite as Pantoja, to look as impressive as he did and to make the case to win that fight as he did. In my opinion, he did win the fight. Dude, Steve Erceg is underrated. I don't care if people are rating him now. You should be rating him even more. So, underrated for me. Merab Dvalishvili, I'm going to put him in slightly overrated. I know he dominated my boy Peter Yan, but Peter Yan was just off that day. He had a bunch of injuries. He told me, I don't know. It's just not as impressive as it seems when you look back on it. He shot for how many takedowns and was successful with how many of them? Like a fraction, over 50 takedown attempts. What did he even land? 2 or 3? I don't know, dude. For me, Merab, he gets hurt with the same shot every time. He just doesn't seem to learn, and he gets by with his physical attributes, right? His gas tank. He weaponizes his cardio, even his grappling, right? He was out scrambled by Cejudo until Cejudo was too tired to scramble with him. He was beat up by Marlon Moraes until Marlon Moraes was too tired to outstrike him. He held Jose Aldo against the fence for 15 minutes. The most impressive performance of Merab's career was against Peter Yan, but as I said, Peter Yan should not have been in the octagon in the first place. Way too many injuries. My boy Peter Yan would never get dominated like that. Absolutely not. So, Merab Dvalishvili, I think he's slightly overrated. Sean Strickland, it's tough to say because I actually really like Sean Strickland. I love what he has to say, and he did beat Izzy. I'm gonna say he's fairly rated. I think he's earned his reputation. There's even an argument that he's slightly underrated at this point. But no, I think he's a fairly rated fighter. People do, recognize that he's a good boxer. He has a great 1-2. Yeah, I think he's fairly rated. Yeah, why not? Ian Gary, fairly rated too, I guess. Right? I don't particularly like the guy, but I feel like everyone can admit that he does have impressive striking skills. I don't think he's underrated or overrated. Yeah, I think he's fairly rated as far as his skills goes, but as far as his personality, I think he's honestly criminally underrated as far as how much he's hated, because this dude is insufferable. Khabib Nurmagomedov. Now let's get into a controversial one here. Slightly overrated for my boy Khabib. Who did he beat? Finished Gaethje, finished Porier, finished McGregor, Who else? As I said, Charles Oliveira has a better resume than him. Islam Makhachev at this point in his career has put together a more impressive resume than Khabib did. Khabib retired way too early. And, for him to retire and call himself the greatest of all time, 30-0, never lost a round, or 29-0 was it? 30? I don't know which number it was. Either way, 29-0, never lost a round. You look at his early career, who was he fighting? A bunch of bums. He won the title off of Al Iaquinta. I just don't think that he retired at the right time. And he retired before he was able to really solidify his legacy as one of the greatest. So I'm putting him at slightly overrated. I can't put him all the way at the top as much as I want to. Because he was that dominant against some top guys, right? He did show how dominant he could be against Porier and Gaethje, who are still elite to this day, right? So there we go. Khabib, I think, slightly overrated. Conor McGregor, I think, is very overrated. I really do. Chandler will probably beat him the way I see it. You can flame me in the comments if you like, but I think Conor McGregor is overrated. Even when you look at his run at featherweight, who was it, Chad Mendes, and then instantly got the shot against Jose Aldo, never defended the belt, went right up to fight Eddie Alvarez, put on one of the greatest performances of all time against him, and then what? Right? Goes into boxing, comes back. Who'd he beat? Donald Cerrone. All right. Impressive? Not really. Gets beat twice by Dustin Poirier. I get the second one. Yeah, he broke his ankle, but he was being pieced up in that fight, and he was completely figured out by Poirier. I thought that it was a matter of time before he got finished again anyway. Yeah, I think that Conor McGregor is one of those fighters that I get that he's loved. His trash talk is amazing. He has this mysticism about him, right? He has this air surrounding him where he's just a legendary individual. And when he's booked to fight, like he is booked to fight at the end of June, I'm excited. We're all excited. But when you really think about Conor McGregor as a fighter, as far as his legacy goes, his resume goes, I don't think that it's as legendary as some people do. Some individual performances, some great ones too. Like, of course, the Jose Aldo knockout is one of the greatest knockouts in title fight history, right? To take him out that early. And then to put on the performance he did against Eddie Alvarez. But it wasn't consistent, right? His career wasn't consistent. There was a point where he made too much money and he no longer was able to keep up with the expectations that he set for himself. So I think Conor McGregor's overrated. Divison Figueiredo, I think I want to put him as slightly overrated. When you think about who he beat, yeah, he beat Benavidez, killed Benavidez. But I think the current state of the flyweight division, if he was fighting the guys that are currently at the top, like Steve Erceg, like Manel Kape, guys like that, I don't know if Figueiredo would have been as dominant of a champion as he was at that time. And then he ran into Moreno, and we saw what happened, man. Moreno was handily able to piece him up in a couple of those fights. I know the third one, Figgy beat him, but in the second and the fourth, relatively one-sided in favor of Moreno. I don't know, his skill set, he's good. Slow on the feet, though, for a flyweight, bantamweight now. Seemed to have been getting the better, or sorry, Cody Garbrandt was seemingly getting the better of him in the first round of their fight. Yeah, I don't know. I think Divison Figueiredo is slightly overrated. Leon Edwards, overrated, absolutely. Not an entertaining fighter. Beat Colby Covington, whoop-de-doo. Like Colby didn't even look like he wanted to be there. Beat Usman both times, so yes, that's impressive. Beat Nate Diaz, okay. That's cool, I guess. Yeah, I don't know. People really do rate him as one of the best strikers in the UFC, but I just don't see it, man. Whenever he throws anything looping, and I feel like I said it in the UFC striking tier list, when he throws anything looping, it looks so sloppy. He has a good straight left. He has a good roundhouse kick. And yes, he's gotten better on the ground, but he just never seems like he wants to finish anybody. Right? He doesn't have that killer instinct. He seems way too content with winning decisions. Right, he's honestly a worse version of Israel Adesanya in that regard. I'm putting him at overrated. I see all kinds of title contenders beating Leon Edwards. I think JDM beats him. I think Shavkat beats him. It's just a matter of time the way I see it, man. Aljamain Sterling, I feel like a lot of people would honestly put him here because he really isn't given his flowers for his bantamweight run. But there's just something about his bantamweight run that never impressed me, man. He never passes the eye test for me. He was absolutely like babied by Peter Yan in their first fight. I mean, he's just such a weird fighter because I appreciate the wins he's picked up. I do appreciate his resume, but the eye test is what kills it for me. The eye test really does kill it. I feel like he's not as good as his wins say he is. He weaponizes pressure. He weaponizes his strength, right, and the natural size advantage he has over a lot of guys at 135. Now he's at 145, and he's doing it again against Calvin Kattar. Ragdolled him. So you know what? I can't say he's underrated. And to be honest, I couldn't in good conscience say that he's overrated because I feel like he isn't rated that much to begin with by many fans. So I'm going to put him in fairly rated in the end. You know what I'm saying? Michael Bisping, overrated. One of the most overrated champs in UFC history. I know up to this point it was all active UFC fighters, but I wanted to include a few past fighters as well to really give my thoughts on them. But Michael Bisping avoided any real contenders at middleweight. Yeah, sure, he fought GSP and got completely messed up by him. He did have some good moments of his own. And sure, he knocked out Luke Rockhold against the odds, right? And then what do you do? He defends his title against an old Dan Henderson. Avoids any possibility of fighting Robert Whitaker because he knew what would have happened against Whitaker. I don't know. It just seemed like Michael Bisping lucked his way to a title. And he did fight Anderson Silva as well. He did have a win over Anderson Silva. Arguably lost that fight, though, by TKO. I don't know. It's a weird one for me. Bisping, I respect the fact that he fought with one eye for so long. So maybe you use that as a factor and put him a little bit lower on this list. But I just think as far as his resume goes, as far as his legacy goes, he's one of those champions that I feel like I look at him with the belt around his shoulder, and it just makes no sense to me that he was champion. I think he's overrated. Jamal Hill, maybe before the Alex Pereira fight, I would have said that he was overrated slightly just because I didn't think that he had much chance of winning that one. And he beat an out-of-prime Glover Teixeira to win that belt. Knocked out a chinny Johnny Walker. Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm going to put him in slightly overrated just because of that cringe moment where he caught Alex Pereira's arrow during his walkout at UFC 300 and then broke it over his knee. That shit was so gay, in all honesty. So I'm putting him at slightly overrated. Islam Makhachev, pound for pound number one, deservingly so. 2 wins over Volkanovski now. Hasn't really defended his title against many dudes or against many like real lightweights. But I can't put him at overrated because his skill set speaks for itself. It does. Great on the feet. He is much better than Khabib, in my opinion. I think he's already surpassed Khabib just based off the eye test. You watch him fight, you realize, okay, he's elite pretty much everywhere. On the feet, he's excellent. Khabib never had that high-level striking, and Islam has that crazy sambo and submission threat to go along with it. He's already set his legacy. I think his legacy has surpassed Khabib at this point because at least he's fought a few genuine top contenders that would have troubled Khabib the way I see it, like Charles Oliveira and 2 times against Volk. Like that knockout against Volk really solidified it for me. You cannot say that Islam is overrated. You can maybe even make an argument that he's slightly underrated, but I do want to see him defend his belt a couple of more times. If he can do it against Dustin Poirier, then that really does solidify him. Maybe even puts him in the underrated category slightly. Joe Anderson Brito, this dude's good. He's underappreciated. Just beat Jack Shore, finished him. I think he's really good. And as far as featherweights go, potential title challengers, I think he's up there. I'm going to put him in slightly underrated. I think he deserves to be there. Watch out for him in the future. Brito, he's coming, man. Topuria, I think he might be slightly underrated too. Just because you look at how people talk about him, right? Everyone's acting like Max Holloway because he beat Justin Gaethje. He will surely beat Topuria. But you need to watch Topuria fight. You need to watch this guy. He's very close to being a perfect fighter. Defensively, one of the best in the UFC. Some of the best hands in the UFC. Serious one-punch knockout power at 145. Elite grappling. elite jiu-jitsu, there's really nothing that Topuria is lacking other than, I guess, kicks above the calf, right? He throws very good calf kicks, so to go on top of that, but he just chooses not to throw kicks to the body or kicks to the head because he rips the body with his punches, right? He doesn't need to kick the body. He really only uses his legs to beat up your calf. He approaches his fight with such tactical brilliance, and he executes his game plans with perfection. He just seems like the complete perfect fighter. So for anyone to say that anyone will surely beat Topuria, I think is crazy, because he's shown himself to be one of the elite fighters in the UFC, one of the elite, in my opinion. I actually put him up there with guys like Islam Makhachev as far as elite fighters. Seriously, if the pound for pound list was up to me, I'd have him there in the top 3, in all honesty. I don't care that he hasn't fought too many guys in the UFC. Off the eye test, the dude is seriously good. Dan Hooker. I don't know, man. I'll put him in fairly rated. The dude's a dog. He's won fights I expected him to lose. He's lost fights I expected him to win. I mean, we all know what we get when we watch a Dan Hooker fight, right? The man's a dog. He pretty much just delivers on that expectation every time he fights. I'll put Dan Hooker in fairly rated. Maurizio Ruffi, I have to put him in underrated. I know he did raise some eyebrows, right? He did raise some eyebrows, but that was only for people who watched the early prelims, right? The general fan base, unless you watch the clip of his knockout after the fact, or you watch the clip of his performance, like, you really might not know that Maurizio Ruffi put on a classic, like, Conor McGregor-esque performance. Not to the same degree, really not to the same degree. I think that those commentators were jerking him off a little bit too hard, a little bit too aggressively jerking him off. I don't think he deserves all that praise, because it was against a pretty lowerly, like a relatively lower level guy, unranked dude. Like, he hasn't shown to have that skill set at the higher levels yet. So I guess for that reason, I can't put him in underrated, but slightly underrated, absolutely. Ciryl Gane, to me, he almost deserves to be in slightly overrated. Like, sure, does he have great striking? Sure. Is he a fast heavyweight? Yes, but he refuses to fight anybody, really. He seems to only take matchups that are stylistically favorable to him. And yes, some of his wins are great, right? The Tuivasa fight was excellent. That win was great. But I thought he faced a little bit too much adversity in that fight for what that fight should have been, right? It should have just been pure domination from him. The Derek Lewis fight was very impressive. But what happened to him against John Jones? I don't know, but who's really beaten Ciryl Gane? It really just comes down to the fact that he doesn't want to fight guys, right? He doesn't want to fight Aspinall. He doesn't want to fight any of these dudes. So I guess for that reason, like, he hasn't really lost to many dudes aside from John Jones, and I guess Ngannou as well. So maybe just based off that mental aspect of his game, the fact that whenever he gets into that position where he could win a belt, he crumbles. Slightly overrated for me, actually. Tom Aspinall, I'll have to put him in slightly underrated, I think. I think he deserves that. I know everybody sees him as a genuine threat to John Jones. It seems like the consensus around the community is that John Jones is scared to fight him. But I just still don't think that he gets the credit he deserves for how good he is for a heavyweight, for how technical he is, for how fast he is, for how athletic this dude is. He's seriously, like based off the eye test, he's one of the best heavyweights of all time. He represents the complete evolution of heavyweights in the UFC or in MMA in general. So I think Aspinall is slightly underrated. Bilal Muhammad, he has to be underrated, right? Even if I don't like watching him fight, I don't look forward to his fights. Whenever Bilal Muhammad is booked for a fight, I don't give a shit. But you cannot deny the win streak he has put together for himself. You can't deny it. And it seems like he's never going to be considered for a title shot. I don't know what more he has to do. There's no other place to put him, man. He is underrated, absolutely. And this one's going to piss some people off, as I'm sure a few of these other ones did here. Chael P. Sonnen. Chael P. Sonnen. is one of the most overrated fighters in UFC history. He literally spoke his way to title shots. Has a very unimpressive resume. Maybe if he beat Anderson Silva the first time around, if he really cashed in on that lottery ticket that he had there, then maybe we'd be having a different conversation. Maybe the trajectory of his career would have been a little bit different. But no, Chael Sonnen is honestly crap. So I'm putting him at overrated. I know the joke would have been to put him at underrated and say, oh, the GOAT never lost around, all that shit, the memes, right, surrounding Chael Sonnen. But I'm a realist out here, baby. I don't care about these memes. Chael Sonnen is an overrated fighter. Colby Covington, he's always been overrated, right? He's really always been overrated when you get down to it. Who has he beaten? He only has wins over fighters who are not in the UFC. And that fact, to me, is enough to put him at the very tippy top. But then when I think about it, I ranked Paulo Costa down here, but we've seen that Paulo Costa has shown that he can still compete. And he is at an age where he can still improve, and he has shown improvements. So maybe Paulo Costa should be fairly rated. I'm actually going to move Paulo Costa up to fairly rated. Yeah, but Colby Covington, overrated absolutely, man. Like, sure, did he put up great fights against Usman? Yes, he did. But yeah, as far as his resume goes, it's really nothing impressive, man. Everyone he's beaten is outside the UFC. I guess Dos Anjos is the only one who's still currently on the roster, but he might even be retired for all I know. Jesus, I don't even know. Gilbert Burns. He was doing well against JDM before the finish. Beat Hamzat Chimaev. Lost to Bilal Muhammad, but he had an injury. So yeah, that one's a little bit tainted. I think Gilbert Burns is fairly rated. Anthony Smith, I'm going to put him in slightly underrated, and that's my own fault too, because I have underrated Anthony Smith throughout his whole career. I don't know if I've ever picked Anthony Smith to win a fight ever in my life. So I am a victim of underrating him with my picks and losing money betting against him. And after that guillotine, that first round guillotine against Petrino, I think it's solidified. The man's underrated. He loves to derail hype trains. And at this point, yes, I will continue to pick against him, but I will be a lot less sure of it going forward, that's for sure. Song Yadong, I'm going to put in slightly overrated. I feel like he's always spoken about as a future title contender, but every time he gets up to that point, he fails. Now, he failed against Sandhagen. Now, he failed against Peter Yan. Do I think he has the skill set, and do I think he's young enough to make it to that point? Yes, but I think as things go, he hasn't shown enough for me to consider him to be an elite fighter. And I think some people do consider him to be elite, right? It's like whenever he loses, he's always getting credit for how good he looked in those losses and how well he fought in those losses. But we need to start talking about the man loses when he gets to the top, and maybe he can clean up some of his frailties in his game. But as things stand, I think he's a little bit overrated. I really do. I really, really do. Arman Tsarukyan, I think it's tough, man. He's either slightly underrated or fairly rated. I want to say slightly underrated. The reason for this is that these Charles Oliveira fans saying that he was robbed against Arman. No, Arman won that fight fair and square, in my opinion. Arman should have gotten that win against Gamrot. So like there really shouldn't be many blemishes on Arman's record. He should really only have the Islam loss on his record. And even in that fight, he had a beautiful, beautiful show of grappling against Islam. Islam's able to really dominate most of his opponents on the ground, but Arman was scrambling with him. And I know they were both young at the time, but still, Arman even back then showing such high level grappling. And his striking is only getting better. Yeah, Arman Tsarukyan, I think, is slightly underrated. He's a great fighter. He really is a great fighter. Magomed Ankalaev, I think fairly rated, maybe. Got his legs chewed up by Jan Blachowicz, and I guess he is the nightmare matchup for Alex Pereira. And you know what? I feel like a lot of people are picking Ankalaev to eventually beat Alex Pereira, so I'll put him in fairly rated. I don't think he's much better than people say or any worse. Jack Hermanson. Man has to be an underrated dude. He has to be underrated. He has to be, because I pick against him every single time. He's pretty much like the Anthony Smith of the middleweight division, because he's always derailing the hype trains, that the UFC puts in front of him. He is the gatekeeper. And against Joe Pyfer, he put on a clinic against him. He really, really did. I think Jack Hermansson is underrated. I don't really rate him that much personally, but yeah, I can't put him at the very bottom actually, because I don't see him ever challenging for a title. At least Belal Muhammad will challenge for a title someday. Peter Yan will be considered the GOAT of MMA one day. But Jack Hermansson, I don't see ever fighting for the title. He's pretty much a gatekeeper. But yeah, slightly underrated I think is more fair for him. Diego Lopez, there's an argument to put him in slightly overrated just because he hasn't fought anybody. But I think the fact that he put up such a great fight against Movsar Evloev in his first fight in the UFC or second fight in the UFC? I think it was his UFC debut, which is crazy. I think he's fairly rated. The expectations that he will one day challenge for a title, I think, are completely fair, and I have those expectations for him personally. Cody Garbrandt, I'm going to put him in slightly overrated. His performance against Dominic Cruz was a flash in the pan. He was never able to replicate that success, and his career pretty much went downhill after that. So I'm going to put Cody Garbrandt in slightly overrated. There are a lot of Garbrandt fans out there, so I'm going to say slightly overrated. It has to be. Ludovic Klein, I'm going to put him in underrated. This dude is not getting his flowers. Nobody is talking about Ludovic Klein as a potential future lightweight champ. I see him that way. I do appreciate the striking aspect of MMA very much, and Ludovic Klein is one of the better strikers, I think, that's unranked in the UFC, and one of the better strikers at 155, but at the same time, maybe because of his one-dimensional nature, maybe slightly underrated is a better place for my man Ludovic Klein. Muhammad Mokaev, time to piss some people off here. Once this finally loads up, this tier maker website is so slow. I'm going to put Muhammad Mokaev at overrated, man. That performance against Alex Perez, yeah, sure, maybe it was a one-off. Maybe it was, and he is super young. I just don't think that this man will ever be a champion at flyweight. He's not well-rounded enough. He's not good on the feet. Yes, he is a submission expert. There's just something about him, man. I just don't see what people see. Maybe because he reps the English flag, and English fans love to overrate their fighters, right? Exhibit C, and then we also have Exhibit A and B in Leon Edwards and Michael Bisping, right? These English fighters are just always so overrated, and I don't understand it. And I know Mokaev is from Dagestan, but he reps the English flag, so all these English fans, and he's always put on these London cards and all that, so it's clear that the English fans want to see this guy fight. I just don't really see all the hype surrounding him, so yeah, overrated 100%. Umar Nurmagomedov, it's hard to say. It really is hard to say, but I'm going to say he's slightly overrated because of his name. His name value is pretty much all he has right now. Like, yes, his performance against Barcelos was impressive. That was a great knockout. A little bit lucky. I don't know. It didn't seem like he meant to knock him out with that shot. I don't know. I could be wrong there. But his last fight against that dude who was having his UFC debut got hurt in that fight and then proceeded to lay and pray for the remainder of it. It wasn't a very impressive performance. And now he's booked to fight Corey Sandhagen. I think Sandhagen will beat him. I think Umar is overrated, but I guess there isn't a huge sample size to go off of because he hasn't been in the UFC for very long. Benoit Saint-Denis, I think, is slightly overrated as well. Obviously, it's easy to say after he was knocked out like that by Dustin Poirier, but I think even leading up to that fight, the expectation that he would walk through someone as elite as Dustin Poirier was crazy. And sure, has his stock dropped? Yes, it has, but I still do think that he's overrated. BSD, I think, belongs there. Brian Ortega, I think he's slightly underrated, actually. Do I? I don't know. I'm trying to think about that. Is he considered to be a title challenger? Not really. Do I consider him to be a potential title challenger? Not really. Do I think he'd beat Topuria? No. I think Topuria would finally crack that chin of his. I like Ortega. It is a good win to have over Yair Rodriguez in his last fight, but I don't know. I think Ortega is fairly rated. I'll put him right in the middle of the pack here. Movsar Evloev. I don't love Evloev. I don't love his style. I don't think he's particularly entertaining. But I think because of how little I rate him he should be an underrated because he's proven that he is a title challenger because of his grappling, because of his elite grappling skill set. Yes, he's okay on the feet. I don't think he's that great though, honestly. But he is a bit underrated. He is generally considered to be one of these boring wrestlers, but I think there's a little bit more to him than that. Pedro Munoz, I'll say he's fairly rated. Not really much to say about Pedro Munoz. One of the greatest chins of all time. But he seems to be like a punching bag for a lot of these guys. Last time out when he fought Kyler Phillips, who is up next in this tier list, I'm actually going to rank Kyler Phillips slightly underrated. Yeah, I think that's fair for him, man. I can see him climbing the bantamweight rankings and doing quite well in the future. That performance against Munoz, he styled on him in a very similar fashion to how Sean O'Malley styled on Chito Vera. Yeah, man. Kyler Phillips is good. Watch out for this kid. He is damn good and entertaining as shit to watch as well. Jared Cannonier, I'm putting him at underrated. He is a serious problem for middleweights right now, especially with Dricus du Plessis holding that belt. When I think about a stylistic matchup that could take the title away from Dricus du Plessis, Jared Cannonier is up there for me. Carries heavyweight power in those hands. Very technical, honestly. Good leg kicks. Great hands. Very strong. Jared Cannonier is a tough matchup for all of these dudes. And if he just goes for it, he can seriously beat anybody. He can beat Izzy. He can beat any of these dudes if he just goes for it and walks forward. I can see him beating a lot of these dudes, but he has been hurt though. So I guess that does explain his more measured approach, but he's such a tank and such a freak of nature that if he wanted to, I feel like he really could knock out so many of these dudes at 170. So not 170, 185, Jesus Christ. Dan Ige, I think he's also underrated. This dude's hands. He has dynamite in his hands. Watch his last few fights. I know he did lose some boring decisions, right, against certain guys. I think Evloev also brought him to this decision at one point. But I don't know, there's something about Dan Ige. He has that equalizer power. And I can see him making some kind of a title run at some point at 145. I'm saying Dan Ige is quite underrated. Jalen Turner, next up. I'm going to put him not slightly overrated in. If you would let me click on him, let me click on his face. It'll update at some point. Jalen Turner's overrated, 100%. All of his success, the way I see it, comes from the fact that he is a horrible weight bully. One of the biggest weight bullies in the UFC. There's no argument about that. Watch him at weigh-ins. The dude looks completely drained. And just look at him against all of his opponents. He looks so big compared to everybody he fights. Has about one round of gas in him. And that's it. Overrated. Fight me on that. You disagree. I don't give a shit. He is overrated 100%. Kai Kara-France. Slightly overrated. I don't know why I feel that way, honestly. I'm just never really that impressed with him when I watch him fight. And I'll for sure ruffle some feathers with this list when I bring up Amir Albazi. But I think Kai Kara-France is a bit overrated. I don't really rate him that much, personally. Arnold Allen, I think, is fairly rated. I guess, British fans, as I said, are pretty radical and they love to overrate their fighters. But I think Arnold Allen and the expectations surrounding him has maybe been brought down to earth recently. So I think he's fairly rated. I do think he can make a title charge, but I feel like it's not like a guaranteed thing, like some people were saying at one point, right? And we get into Cal Barallo. His performance against Paul Craig was impressive. Do I think he'll be a champion one day? It's possible. It's definitely possible. I think he's fairly rated, right? I don't think he's underrated or overrated. I think he's about fairly rated, man. Kopylov, I'm going to put in slightly underrated, especially because he was finished by Anthony Hernandez, right? That kind of took away a lot of his hype, but I still think the hype should be there. He is a serious striker, and I think if you match him up against a lot of these dudes at 185 right now, I think he beats him. I think he honestly does beat them just with his striking alone. Joaquin Buckley, I'm going to say he's slightly underrated, and that is down to me underrating him in my Future Champ video. He looked really good against what's his name? the crazy guy from like Kazakhstan or whatever that he just beat, the guy who was like 6'5". I don't even remember. Uzaboyev? Maybe that's his name. But Joaquin Buckley honestly looked good in that fight and impressed me. So I have to say Joaquin Buckley is slightly underrated. Joe Pyfer, I'm going to put in slightly overrated. I can't put him at the very top because I feel like his performance against Jack Hermanson derailed a lot of that hype. So because the hype train isn't at full force anymore, I can't rate him all the way at overrated, but slightly, yeah, most definitely I think he deserves to be there. Jose Aldo, slightly underrated, I'm going to say. I think the fact that he just came back out of retirement to beat Jonathan Martinez in dominant fashion the way he did puts him here. Even before that, like the little win streaks he would put on at 135 at his age too. At 135 too. 135 is so competitive. The skill level at 135 is so high. Beat Chito Vera. Who else did he beat? Rob Font, man, hurt him in every single round. Looked great in that fight. And plus his run at 145, of course, right? One of the greatest fighters to ever compete in the octagon. And I still don't think that he gets the recognition that he deserves. So I'm going to put Jose Aldo at slightly underrated. There's no shame in getting your shit kicked in by Peter Yan, right? It would happen to all of us. Francis Ngannou, you name it. Michael Bisping, I already included him. Jesus, why are there two Michael Bispings in this list? Come on now. Ronda Rousey, I wasn't going to talk about her, but I kind of did feel like adding on to the hatred that she gets online, and I just want to give my opinion. I've said it forever. I remember at one point my brother was such a Ronda Rousey fan. He was like obsessed with her. And I used to always tell him, like, wait until the women get better. Wait until the women at that weight class get better. You just wait. She will get figured out. And as expected, she was completely figured out. Like, who did she beat? I don't think anyone can even name those that she beat. Maybe only Miesha Tate and Kat Zingano. Was Miesha Tate ever elite? I mean, maybe at that time, but compared to the standard of women's fighters now, no, she is not elite at all. Dude, Ronda Rousey is unanimously an... Wait, did I put her in underrated? Jesus Christ. Okay. Let's correct that real quick. Correct the record. Ronda Rousey is an overrated. Oh my God, almost the worst oversight of my entire life right there. Yoel Romero, I'm going to put him in slightly overrated. Some consider him to be one of the best to never win the belt. I don't really consider him that way. He's too stagnant. For how much of a freak of nature he is, really. He was way too lazy with his style and way too inactive. I don't know. I never rated him the same way some people did, although a Yoel Romero fight was always an exciting one, right, in prospect, but would oftentimes not turn out to be as entertaining as it would look on paper. Actually, that's not even true. Pretty much just against Izzy, that was the case. But put on great fights against Paulo Costa, beaten by him. Great fight against Whitaker the second time around, beaten by him. Arguably robbed, if you feel that way. I don't know. But I don't know. I think Romero is a bit overrated in the grand scheme of things. Demetrius Johnson. This is pretty much just based off of him when he was in the UFC. Underrated. There's really no other argument for where to put him. He never got his flowers by the UFC, and really was only recognized by hardcore UFC fans at the time because it seemed like the casual fan base didn't care for the smaller fighters. Henry Cejudo, I'm going to say that he's fairly rated because he is considered to be one of the best combat sports athletes of all time, and I think he's made his case for that. So fairly rated is where he deserves to be. Manel Kape, I'm going to say Manel Kape is slightly underrated. I know he never fights, but this dude is so good. He's just so good. I don't need to see him fight to know how good he is. Maybe one more win and he'll be in title contention. He might even get the next title shot, to be honest, because flyweight is just that kind of division where one win can really set you apart from everyone else in that division. And I do think that Manel Kape, despite the fact he keeps pulling out of fights, man, you got to get in the octagon and fight, motherfucker, because you're kind of hurting my fandom of you, man. But Manel Kape, I think, is a bit underrated, in all honesty. Brandon Royval, fairly rated, I would say. Not really much more to say. Good fighter, good hands. He's improving. Good off his back. Wild fighter. Not as wild as he was in his earlier UFC fights, but a wild guy, and I enjoy watching him. Yeah, I think he's fairly rated. Amir Albazi, I'm going to say is slightly underrated. I guess because he is a grappling heavy fighter, but his hands are pretty good. But people don't really rate him, I guess, because they consider his win against Kai Kara-France a robbery. I honestly considered it to be a bit of a robbery when I first watched it as well, but I don't know if it takes away completely from Albazi as a title contender. I actually think stylistically he matches up quite well with someone like Pantoja. They're actually quite similar, with Pantoja being more of a marauding force, and Albazi is a bit more measured in his approach. But the fact that Pantoja does take a more grappling heavy approach, Albazi I actually think would be better than him on the feet, a bit more technical, a bit more clean on the feet. I can see Albazi honestly beating Pantoja stylistically. Then we get into Alexander Rakic. Say slightly underrated. I know he lost to Yuri Prochazka, but he looked so good in that fight, right? He looked so good against Yuri Prochazka that I think someone like Alexander Rakic is underrated, man. Underrated. The fact that he looked so good there after that long of a layoff, actually he looked better than I'd ever seen him before. His hands looked better than ever before. Alexander Rakic is slightly underrated, in my personal opinion. And then we get into Jan Blachowicz. Now this is mostly covering him when he was on his light heavyweight run. I will say slightly underrated for Jan Blachowicz. Alexander Volkov, I'd say he deserves a similar type of placement. The man's good. He's one of the best strikers at heavyweight. Very technical. He's lost to some interesting competition, but pretty much just the top of the division. I guess the Derek Lewis loss is a bit of a damper on his record, right? Because he was, but he was doing so well in that fight leading up to that point, and he has one of the coolest tattoos in the game. So slightly underrated for him. Sergey Pavlovich, I think he's fairly rated, right? I think he's fairly rated. The general consensus is that Pavlovich hits like a truck, which he does, and can really beat anybody in the UFC, which he can if he just lands the right shot. Yeah, he was knocked out by Tom Aspinall. I don't know if it takes away too much from him. I guess there is an argument to even put him at overrated, but there isn't that same vibe surrounding Sergey Pavlovich anymore. Before it was guaranteed knockout loss brutally in the first round when you go to fight Pavlovich, but I feel like now heavyweights will fear him a little bit less, you know what I'm saying? And I feel like fans aren't picking him as unanimously to beat whoever he's matched up against anymore. GSP, I wanted to add him in here to say that he is slightly underrated. To say that he isn't the greatest of all time, to me, is a little bit crazy, right? To put John Jones, right, with the steroids and all that, testing positive. GSP never tested positive. Never once tested positive, and avenged every loss. Even though he lost, he avenged every loss that he ever had in dominant fashion. And I respect that from GSP. So I'm going to say he's underrated when it comes to the GOAT conversation, because he should be considered to be the number one greatest of all time, in my opinion. Vitor Petrino, slightly overrated, I would say. Yeah, Petrino. I don't know, dude. Obviously, it's easy to say. Once again, it's very easy to call people overrated when they... Is he even on the list right now? Where is Petrino? Where did Petrino go? I've lost Vitor Petrino. How am I not noticing where he is? Anyway, let's just keep talking about Petrino, but he's supposed to be in slightly overrated. Where is he? Why can I not see him? This is wild right now. Vitor Petrino. Holy shit. Anyway, there he is. Fairly rated. Absolutely not. Overrated fighter. He's really just a physical specimen. I think that's what it comes down to. Other than that, he's kind of stupid, right? He just gave the guillotine to Anthony Smith like that. I don't know. That to me is enough to put him at slightly overrated. He even arguably deserves to be an overrated, but I feel like he never got to the point where he was rated to begin with that heavily. Oh, now I'm gonna ruffle some feathers with the last one of this list here. Tony Ferguson. I feel like he almost deserves to be in a similar position to Khabib. But oh baby, I'm putting Tony Ferguson in overrated. I'm sorry, guys. I know. No, I'm not sorry. I'm gonna own this shit. Tony Ferguson is overrated. Yes, he had that crazy 13 fight win streak, but who did he beat? No one really that impressive. Donald Cerrone, Anthony Pettis, right? All that shit. Dude, who cares? That win streak sucks. How about his losing streak? How about that losing streak he went on? I understand, yeah, old Tony Ferguson, but a lot of those losses came around the same time as some of his impressive wins, right? El Kukui was just never as good as we said. And I know he never got the opportunity to show that he could become champ because he was never given the opportunity. He was so unlucky in his career. And I guess that's what led to his eventual downfall. But I think that even Tony Ferguson in his prime never proved himself to be worthy of being called one of the greatest lightweights of all time because he never beat the greatest lightweights of all time. He never beat Gaethje. He didn't even get to fight Porier. I think Porier would have beat him up. Dude, explain to me. If you disagree with me, then really rationalize why you think that Tony Ferguson, based off his resume alone, why you think Tony Ferguson is as legendary and as great as we all thought. Yeah, dude, I root for Ferguson in every fight of his because I love Ferguson. I love him. I love El Kukui. I do. But that doesn't mean that he's not overrated. It's the same thing as Nate Diaz. I love Nate Diaz, but it doesn't mean that he deserves to be as rated as highly as he is by the MMA fan base. So let's just take a quick little sift through the underrated, slightly underrated right here. Yeah, you can pause on that if you want to take a look. Fairly rated and slightly overrated. And then we get into the overrated side of the list. Let me know in the comment section below what you think about this list. I know there will be some disgruntled MMA fans in my comment section, which I welcome with open arms. So anyway, guys, let me know in the comment section below what you thought of the video and any ideas you might want me to cover for future videos. And I will take that into account 100%. Anyway, guys, have a good one.